I used to believe that games ended when you stood up from the table. That once the cards were collected, the chips stacked, and the room emptied, the moment was over. I was wrong. Some games don't end. They follow. They linger. They wait. And sometimes, they move faster than you do. By the time I crossed the border into the third state, I realized the game wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead. Waiting. The first sign came at a roadside diner in northern Louisiana. The kind of place that seemed to exist only because the highway hadn't completely forgotten it. A crooked neon sign flickered above the entrance, struggling to spell a name that no longer mattered. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, grease, and something faintly metallic, as if the building itself were rusting from the inside out. The vinyl seats were cracked and sagging, patched together with duct tape and memory, and the windows were streaked with dust and old rain, blurring the world outside into a restless smear of headlights and shadows. I hadn't stopped for food. I stopped because the silence in my car had become unbearable. Hours of empty road had pressed against my thoughts until they began to echo. The hum of the engine, the whisper of tires against asphalt, the endless black ribbon of highway stretching forward without promise or direction, all of it created a kind of vacuum, a space too large to leave alone. I needed noise. Any noise, even the clatter of dishes and the murmur of strangers would do. The door chimed weakly as I stepped inside. A handful of truckers occupied the far counter, shoulders hunched, eyes dulled by fatigue and repetition. A radio played softly somewhere behind the kitchen wall, its signal fading in and out, struggling to hold on to a country song that sounded older than the road itself. The waitress looked up once, then poured a cup of coffee before I even reached the booth. She slid it across the table without asking, her movements practiced, automatic, as if she had long ago surrendered any expectation that people would know what they wanted. The coffee tasted like metal. Not bitter, not burnt. Just metallic. Like the inside of a forgotten coin. I let it cool between my hands, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The face looking back at me felt unfamiliar, thinner, sharper, edged with something that hadn't been there weeks earlier. The miles had rearranged me. The money had reshaped me. And the quiet had begun to hollow me out. That's when I noticed him. 2 booths down. A man in a gray suit sat alone, perfectly still. He wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, not even pretending to. His coffee sat untouched, and touched long enough for a thin skin to form on the surface. His posture was relaxed, but deliberate, the way a man sits when he intends to remain exactly where he is for a very long time. He was watching me. Not openly. Not aggressively. Just enough. Our eyes met through the narrow space between booths. He gave a small nod. Polite, calm, precise. Not a greeting. A confirmation. In that tiny gesture, the world shifted. Something cold settled beneath my ribs. He already knew who I was. And somehow, that terrified me more than if he hadn't. Because recognition meant history. And history meant intent. I looked away first, pretending to study the surface of the table, its chipped edges and cigarette burns, tracing forgotten stories. My pulse began to tap softly against my throat. Slow, controlled, but insistent. I told myself it was coincidence. A stranger. A traveler. A man with nothing better to do than observe the room. But I didn't believe it. Not after Texas. Not after New Orleans. Not after the way doors had opened without knocking, and games had waited for me as if I were always late. I took a slow sip of coffee and tasted the metal again, sharper now, as though it were seeping directly into my bloodstream. Across the diner, the man shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other. The movement was subtle, calculated, not nervous, not impatient, comfortable, as if he had all the time in the world. The waitress passed by, refilling cups, asking tired questions to tired men. When she reached his booth, she hesitated, waiting. He didn't look at her, didn't respond. She lingered a second longer, then moved on, and settled by the absence of acknowledgement. It struck me then how quiet he was. Not just silent. Quiet. The kind of quiet that absorbs sound rather than creating it. The kind that forces others to adjust their volume, their movement, their breath. I realized, with sudden clarity, that I had seen this kind of presence before. In back rooms. At private tables. In spaces where names carried weight and consequences followed intention. This man didn't belong to the road. He belonged to the game. And that meant the game hadn't let me go. I stood slowly, leaking a few bills beneath the coffee cup. The diner felt smaller now, the ceiling lower, the walls inching closer. The air pressed against my chest. Every step toward the door seemed to echo louder than it should. The bell chimed again as I stepped outside. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and cleansing, but it didn't ease the tension coiled beneath my skin. I crossed the gravel lot toward my car, aware acutely, painfully aware of the space behind me. He didn't follow. That was worse. Because pursuit is obvious. Surveillance is patient. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The headlights cut across the empty road, illuminating a stretch of asphalt that vanished into darkness. For a moment, I sat there, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the idle of the motor, the soft ticking of cooling metal. In the rearview mirror, the diner glowed weakly, its neon sign stuttering in tired pulses. The man in gray remained inside. Watching. Waiting. I pulled onto the highway, the tires humming as the road swallowed me again. The diner shrank behind me, then disappeared entirely, absorbed by distance and night. But the feeling did not fade. It tightened. Because I understood something then, with absolute certainty. The road was no longer a path forward. It was a corridor. And somewhere ahead, another table was being prepared. Another game was being arranged. Another lesson was waiting to be taught. And I had the uneasy sense that, this time, the stakes would not be measured in money. Money changes things, but not in the way people imagine. It doesn't buy freedom. It buys attention. And attention is the most dangerous currency in any underground world. After Texas, I couldn't move unnoticed anymore. Not in the way I used to. Not as a shadow drifting between cheap motels and nameless highways. Not as a man whose presence barely disturbed the air around him. That version of me had vanished somewhere between the felt of a private table and the long gravel road that led back to the world. In his place stood someone heavier, not in body, but in consequence. The money wasn't hidden. It radiated. Like heat. Like danger. It announced me before I spoke, before I stepped into a room, before my shadow crossed a doorway. It clung to the car I drove, to the dust on my shoes, to the silence that followed me into diners and gas stations. I felt it in the way conversations paused when I entered, in the way eyes lifted for just a second longer than necessary, in the way smiles appeared too quickly, too carefully. I crossed into Mississippi at sunset, the sky bleeding orange and violet across endless fields. The highway rolled forward in a straight line, flanked by dark trees and silent farmland. I should have felt relief. Movement had always been my escape. Miles used to wash things away. But this time, the miles only made the wait more noticeable. By Alabama, just before dawn, my hands were sore from gripping the steering wheel. Not from tension, from restraint. From holding myself back from turning around. From disappearing into some anonymous stretch of back roads. From shedding this new identity like an ill-fitting coat. Everywhere I stopped, someone already knew. Not my name. My shape. My outline. The rumor of me. At a truck stop outside Jackson, the cashier rang up my coffee and sandwich without speaking, then glanced at the car keys in my hand. His eyes lingered for a half-second too long on the worn leather case at my side. In Birmingham, the motel clerk slid the room key across the counter with exaggerated care, as though afraid sudden movement might startle me. Even in places where no one should have known anything, the atmosphere shifted the moment I arrived. The money wasn't visible, but it was felt. It hung beneath the surface of every interaction, vibrating quietly, insistently, like an electrical current beneath the skin of the world. By the second night, I understood. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't curiosity. This was orchestration. Someone was guiding my path, not forcing it, shaping it, gently, like steering a card from the top of the deck to the bottom. Slow, invisible. I didn't know who, but I knew why. There was another table waiting. The realization came somewhere between a forgotten highway exit and a roadside motel, whose vacancy sign flickered as if unsure it still believed in itself. I had pulled over to rest, the sky still heavy with night, the air damp and unmoving. My room smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes. The bed sagged in the middle, surrendering immediately beneath my weight. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it struggled to move. The thick southern air. The room hummed softly, not quite silence, not quite sound. Somewhere outside, a train horn moaned in the distance, long and low, like a warning that refused to fully announce itself. I tried to calculate my route, tried to tell myself I was choosing these roads. But the more I thought about it, the more the pattern revealed itself. Every stop made sense only if someone else had planned it. The diner in Louisiana, the motel outside Meridian, the gas station near Mobile. Each location nudged me forward, offering comfort just long enough to keep me moving. Nothing blocked my path. Nothing challenged my direction. Doors opened, roads cleared, opportunities appeared precisely when I needed them. Not miracles. Arrangements. And arrangements always come with intent. I closed my eyes and listened to the faint sounds of passing traffic, each car whispering through the darkness before fading away. I envied their anonymity, their freedom to exist without consequence. They were just shapes in motion, unburdened by expectation. I wasn't. The money had changed my gravitational pull. In places like Texas and New Orleans, wealth doesn't sit still. It circulates, it observes, it tests, and once you hold enough of it long enough, you become part of that circulation, a moving piece on a board far larger than any single game. I had one more than I could carry. Now, I was carrying more than I could escape. The next morning, the highway rose in gentle curves through pine forests and forgotten towns. Roadside churches leaned slightly, as if exhausted by time. Hand-painted signs advertised boiled peanuts, fresh pies, mechanical repairs. None of them felt real. They were props in a stage set built for travelers who still believed in randomness. I didn't. At a small roadside cafe near the Alabama border, I stopped for breakfast. The bell above the door chimed softly. Only 2 other customers sat inside. Both men, both silent. The waitress poured coffee before I asked, then paused, studying my face with a thoughtful curiosity that unsettled me. "You're a long way from home," she said. It wasn't a question. "Everybody is," I replied. She considered that, then nodded, as if confirming something to herself. As she walked away, I noticed one of the men glance at me over the rim of his cup. Just once, just enough. Not recognition. Acknowledgement. It followed me everywhere. By noon, the road grew emptier. The field stretched wider. The sky expanded until it felt like it might swallow the earth whole. And in that openness, the sense of being guided became even stronger. With fewer choices, direction becomes easier to predict. I wondered how many hands were shaping my path. 1? 2? A network? Was this the continuation of the invitation from New Orleans? Or something born at that long table in Texas? Or had I stepped into something older, deeper, a current that predated my existence entirely? The thought tightened my chest. Because currents don't stop for individuals. They carry them. And if you struggle too hard, they drown you. That evening, pulled into a nameless town, just as the sun collapsed behind the horizon. The sky burned red, then dimmed to purple, then vanished into black. Streetlights flickered on, revealing empty sidewalks and shuttered storefronts. The motel stood at the edge of town, its windows glowing faintly like tired eyes. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as I signed the register. "Room 12, he said. The key was already waiting. In my room, I set the case down carefully, as though it might bruise the carpet. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew the shape of its contents too well. I felt their presence in the way the air around it seemed to thicken, as if resisting the space it occupied. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember what life had felt like before money became weight, before silence became threat, before winning became obligation. It was difficult. The past blurred, its edges softened by distance and exhaustion, but I remembered movement, freedom, the comfort of knowing that if I disappeared, no one would notice, no one would care. Now, every mile I traveled seemed to echo somewhere I couldn't see. That night, I dreamed of cards. Not faces, not numbers, just endless decks, shuffled by invisible hands, stacked and restacked in patterns too complex to follow. I moved through them like a ghost, touching nothing, yet altering everything. Each step rearranged the order, each breath changed the outcome. I woke before dawn, my heart racing, the room still wrapped in shadow. I didn't need a map to know which direction to drive. The pole was already there. The next days blurred together in long stretches of highway, punctuated by brief, strange encounters. A man at a roadside bar who slid my drink closer without being asked. A mechanic who fixed my car and refused payment, his eyes never leaving my face. A motel owner who upgraded my room, saying only, "You look like you've had a long road." Each gesture felt rehearsed. Each kindness carried the weight of expectation. They weren't helping me. They were escorting me. And escorts always deliver their passengers somewhere specific. By the time I crossed into Georgia, I stopped pretending I was in control. I let the road take me, because resisting would only expose how little choice I actually had. The realization brought a strange calm. If this was orchestration, then my role was already written. All I could do was play it well. Late one evening, as the sky dimmed into a soft gray and the cicadas began their relentless chorus, I felt it again, that familiar tightening in my chest, the subtle shift in the air that meant I was close to something waiting. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to gravel. Trees leaned inward, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. My headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, revealing only what was immediately necessary. And in that moment, I understood the true weight of winning. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was inevitability. Because once you win enough, the world doesn't ask where you want to go. It decides where you belong. And somewhere ahead, beyond the reach of headlights and beyond the comfort of choice, another table was being prepared. Another game. Another test. One that wouldn't measure my skill or my nerve, but my willingness to keep walking forward, even when every instinct begged me to disappear. And as the gravel whispered beneath my tires, I realized something that unsettled me more than any threat ever could. Part of me wanted to see that table. Part of me wanted to know what waited there. Because the road had already taught me its cruelest lesson. Once the game starts, following you, walking away is no longer the same as escaping. It waited for me in a forgotten river town where the streets curved instead of crossing. A place built without logic, as if even the city planners had feared drawing straight lines here. The roads bent slowly, circling back on themselves, looping through neighborhoods that felt abandoned long before they ever died. Storefronts stood with their windows boarded, paint peeled back to bare wood, names long faded. The river slid past the town like a secret, dark and slow, carrying reflections of broken streetlights and nothing else. An abandoned textile warehouse waited at the edge of it all. No lights, no signs, just a single door, freshly painted black. The contrast unsettled me. Everything around it was decay. Rusted fences, cracked pavement, weeds breaking through concrete, but that door untouched. Intentional, as if someone had pressed pause on time just for it. I parked 2 streets away and walked. Each step echoed too loudly in the silence. The night air smelled faintly of damp brick and river water. Somewhere nearby, clanged softly. Loose sheet iron tapping against a wall in the breeze. No voices, no traffic, no music drifting from open windows. The town held its breath. When I reached the door, hesitated. Not from fear, from recognition. I had felt this moment approaching for days. The diner, the motel, the gas stations, the watching eyes, the invisible steering, all of it had been leading here. I knocked once. The door opened immediately. Inside, the air was cold. Artificial. Manufactured calm. Not the stale chill of abandonment, but controlled temperature. Purposeful, the kind of cold meant to keep minds sharp and sweat from forming. It smelled faintly of polished wood, metal, and something sterile beneath it all. The warehouse was hollowed out, its cavernous interior swallowed by darkness. Only one section was illuminated, a circle of light in the center, hovering like a stage. And in that circle waited the room. Large space. Small table. 6 seats. 6 players. No spectators. No distractions. The floor beneath my shoes changed from rough concrete to smooth wood as I stepped forward. My footsteps softened. Even sound obeyed different rules here. The table was old. Not scarred like the one in New Orleans. Not monumental like the one in Texas. This one was compact, efficient, its surface worn smooth by decades of hands, cards, and silence. The felt was dark, almost black, swallowing the light rather than reflecting it. 6 chairs waited. 5 already occupied. 1 empty. Mine. No one looked at me as I approached. Not out of rudeness. Out of discipline. They already knew I was there. The dealer stood at the head of the table. Thin. Pale. Precise. His face held no expression that could be read as emotion. His eyes flicked from player to player with exact calculation, measuring posture, breathing, rhythm. Every movement of his hands felt rehearsed down to the millimeter. This man did not deal cards. He managed outcomes. The men around the table looked different than before. Not wealthy. Not flashy. Dangerous in quieter ways. Men whose power didn't need display. One had scarred knuckles, thick and crooked, the hands of someone who had once made his living through violence, and no longer needed to. Another wore a watch worth more than my car, but dressed like a farmer. Faded denim, worn boots, a simple shirt rolled at the sleeves. The message was clear. Wealth here was not a costume, it was infrastructure. The man across from me unsettled me most. Calm eyes. Trembling fingers. The most dangerous combination of all. A man capable of fear, who refused to obey it. No introductions. No explanations. Just chips placed before us. They arrived silently, stacked with surgical precision. No one counted. No one needed to. At tables like this, the value is understood. The dealer finally spoke. Gentlemen, the game is already in motion. The words landed heavier than they should have. Not about to begin. Not starting now. Already in motion. Which meant that what we were about to do here was only one movement in a sequence already unfolding elsewhere. The first card slid across the felt. The room fell into a silence so complete it felt physical, like pressure against the skin. The farmer-dressed man to my right received ace of spades, king of clubs. Strong opening. Across the table, scarred knuckles peeled back a corner, pocket tens. Solid. The trembling fingered man hesitated before lifting his cards, then nodded slightly. Queen and jack of diamonds, suited. Potential. Danger disguised as hope. My own cards arrived last. Ace of hearts. 9 of hearts. Playable. Flexible. Not spectacular. Not worthless. A hand that demanded patience. The first round of betting unfolded without a word. Chips moved forward, small amounts, testing the temperature of the table. No aggression, no bravado. Each bet measured the space between confidence and restraint. The dealer burned a card. The flop arrived. 10 of hearts, queen of clubs, 3 of spades. The table shifted subtly. Scarred knuckles had connected top set potential. Trembling fingers now held top pair with straight possibilities. The farmer had nothing yet, but position favored him. My ace-high heart gave me backdoor possibilities. But none of that mattered, yet. What mattered was how they moved. Scarred knuckles bet deliberately, sliding chips forward with the certainty of a man accustomed to obedience. Trembling fingers paused, inhaled, then called. Not folded, not raised, just enough to stay. The farmer watched both of them, then called as well. When it reached me, I hesitated. Not for strategy. For theater. Every table has a language. This one spoke in tempo. Too quick meant fear. Too slow meant calculation. I split the difference and called. The dealer's hands never stopped moving. Turn card. 7 of hearts. The room tightened. Now I had the nut flush, draw. Scarred knuckles remained powerful. Trembling fingers gained nothing. The farmer still floated. The bet this time was heavier. Scarred knuckles pushed forward a tall stack, his knuckles whitening slightly as his fingers released the chips. It wasn't anger, it was dominance. Trembling fingers folded. No hesitation. No regret. Just acceptance. The farmer studied the board, then the bettor, then me. His gaze lingered, not curious, not probing, simply assessing. After a moment, he folded as well. Now, it was just me and Scarred Knuckles. 2 men. 1 turn. Card. 1 river left. The pot was already swollen. Enough to matter. Enough to change things. I stared at the felt, letting the silence stretch. I felt the eyes on me, not burning, not pressing, simply observing. This table didn't rush decisions, it collected them. I called. The river arrived. 2 of hearts. The flush completed. But I did not react. Neither did Scarred Knuckles. He checked. Not weakness. Suspicion. He sensed the shift. I bet. Not large. Not small. Enough to suggest confidence without screaming it. He studied my face. I offered nothing. Finally, he called. I turned over the hearts. The dealer nodded once. Scarred Knuckles exhaled slowly, then pushed his remaining chips forward. Not angry, not resentful. Acknowledging. The pot slid toward me. Not with celebration. With inevitability. That hand set the tone. Over the next hours, the game unfolded in layers. Hands of precision. Hands of tension. Hands of surrender. The farmer trapped a full house against 2 top pairs, extracting every chip with surgical patience. The trembling-fingered man bluffed into stone and paid for it, shrinking visibly in his seat. Scarred Knuckles recovered some losses through relentless pressure, forcing folds rather than chasing showdowns. And me? I floated. Not dominating. Not collapsing. Picking moments. Letting the game reveal itself. This wasn't poker as I had known it. This was negotiation. Every bet was a question. Every call, an answer. Every fold, a confession. At one point, I found myself holding pocket kings. The flop came king high, top set, the dream. The betting escalated quickly. The farmer raised. Scarred Knuckles raised. I called. The turn paired the board another king. Quads. An unbeatable hand. And yet, my pulse did not quicken. Because here, even invincibility felt temporary. The river brought a harmless deuce. Scarred Knuckles moved all in. Not desperation. Challenge. The farmer folded. All eyes turned to me. I called. When the cards revealed, there was no reaction. No surprise. No disbelief. Just quiet accounting. Chips flowed. Stacks grew. But with them grew something else. Attention. By midnight, I felt it distinctly. The air around me thickened. Not hostility. Focus. I had crossed some invisible threshold. Not of profit. Of relevance. The trembling-fingered man avoided my gaze now. The farmer studied me more openly. Scarred knuckles adjusted his posture, squaring his shoulders when I entered. A hand. And the dealer? He began watching me. Not closely. Continuously. As though cataloging patterns. Memory. Risk. At one point, during a rare pause between hands, the dealer looked directly at me. "The game moves differently around you," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't praise. It was a statement of fact. I said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. The hours blurred. The room felt sealed from time, existing in its own suspended pocket, where dawn and dusk held no authority. My stack grew steadily, not explosively, but relentlessly. And with every chip I gained, the sense of orchestration deepened. This wasn't chance. This wasn't luck. This was curation. I was being shown something. Tested. Measured. The final hand of the night arrived without ceremony. 6 players. Full table. A collective inhale. The card slid across. I peeled mine back. Ace of spades. Ace of diamonds. Pocket rockets. The table offered its sharpest teeth. The farmer opened with a raise. Scarred knuckles called. Trembling fingers hesitated, then folded. The man to my left raised. I paused, then called. The farmer called. 4 players. Flop. Ace of clubs. King of hearts. 10 of spades. Top set again. Unreal. The farmer checked. Scarred knuckles bet. The man to my left raised. I merely called. The farmer folded. Turn. Queen of spades. Now straights and flush draws bloomed across the table. Scarred knuckles pushed hard. The man to my left went all in. Every eye shifted to me. And for a moment, I understood the real purpose of this room. Not money. Not dominance. Not fear. Decision. What would I do when given certainty? I called. Scarred knuckles folded. The man to my left turned over Jack and 9 of spades. Straight and flush. Draw. Immense potential. The river fell. 4 of diamonds. Nothing. My aces held. The dealer stacked the chips in front of me with flawless precision. No congratulations. No commentary. Only the quiet reshaping of the table's hierarchy. As the players rose, one by one, no one spoke. The farmer nodded slightly in my direction. Scarred knuckles held my gaze for a long second, then turned away. The trembling-fingered man left without looking back. The dealer remained. "You'll be expected again," he said calmly. Not an invitation. A warning. As I stepped back into the cold night, the river town lay silent, its curved streets swallowing my path. Almost immediately, the warehouse disappeared behind me as if it had never existed. But I knew better. Some places don't vanish. They wait. And somewhere ahead, another table was already being prepared. One that would not merely test my skill, but my loyalty. And as the engine turned and the road unwound before me, I understood that the game no longer followed me. I was carrying it. And it was getting heavier with every mile. The room didn't breathe. It waited. Not like a space waiting to be filled, but like a predator waiting to strike, perfectly still, perfectly patient. The hum of the overhead lights blended with the faint vibration of the building, a low mechanical pulse that sank into my bones. Every sound felt amplified. The soft slide of chips, the whisper of fabric as someone shifted in their chair, the faint exhale of breath through clenched teeth. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a laboratory. A place where pressure was distilled, where decisions were stripped of comfort and reduced to instinct. The first few hands were slow, measured, testing. Each player was mapping the others, building silent profiles, cataloging gestures, breathing patterns, micro-reactions. Nobody wanted to reveal too much early. Nobody wanted to become the first target. Every bet was a question. Every fold, an answer. The dealer moved like a machine, thin fingers gliding across felt with surgical precision. No wasted motion, no unnecessary glance. He wasn't part of the game. He was gravity and unchanging force around which everything else revolved. My first real hand came quietly. Ace of spades. Jack of hearts. Strong, not dominant. A hand that invites confidence but punishes arrogance. I let my fingers rest loosely on the chips, resisting the urge to protect the cards, as if someone might steal them. Across from me, scarred knuckles tapped once against the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. The farmer leaned back, eyes half-lidded, like he was drifting towards sleep. The trembling man stared at the felt, as though the answers might surface if he concentrated hard enough. I raised. Not large. Just enough to speak. Scarred knuckles, called. The farmer folded. The trembling man hesitated, then matched. 3 players. The flop came down. Ace of diamonds. 7 of clubs. 10 of hearts. Top pair. Decent kicker. On paper, a comfortable position. But paper doesn't survive contact with reality. Because danger doesn't live in what you can see. It lives in what you can't. The trembling man bet heavy. Too heavy. Not reckless. Provocative. A challenge disguised as confidence. His breathing betrayed him. Shallow. Fast. His pulse fluttered visibly in his throat. Fear dressed in bravado. This wasn't strength. This was desperation. I called. Scarred knuckles folded. Now, it was just the two of us, suspended in a moment that felt stretched thin enough to snap. The turn revealed a queen of spades. And suddenly, the board transformed. Now, every straight was possible. Every bluff carried lethal potential. Every decision demanded blood. The trembling man didn't hesitate. He shoved all in. Everything. His entire stack crossed the invisible boundary in the center of the table, landing with a dull, final sound. The room seemed to lean forward. And in that instant, clarity arrived like ice water. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about money. This was about breaking someone. He needed me to fold. Not for profit. For validation. For relief. For permission to keep breathing. I studied him. His eyes were wide now. Too wide. Not predatory. Pleading. And that was the moment I understood something fundamental about these rooms. The most dangerous players aren't the fearless ones. They're the terrified ones who have convinced themselves they have nothing left to lose. Because they'll burn everything just to escape their own fear. I folded. Quietly. No drama. No flourish. The pot slid to him. And his shoulders collapsed. Not in triumph. In relief. He exhaled like someone surfacing after being held underwater. That wasn't victory. That was survival. The next hand arrived before the room could settle. Pocket kings. 2 black pillars of inevitability. The kind of hand that carries both promise and threat. I raised. Scarred knuckles raised instantly. The farmer shoved. No hesitation. No calculation. Just pure forward momentum. The trembling man folded without a second glance. Fear had already emptied him. Now, it was between me and the farmer. He looked ordinary. That was the problem. Men who look ordinary in rooms like this are never ordinary. His eyes were calm. Not bored. Not curious. Neutral. A dangerous neutrality. His hands were steady. No, tremor, no tension. This was either absolute strength or absolute deception. I searched for anything. A twitch, a breath held too long, a flicker of doubt. Nothing. He might as well have been carved from wood. I called. The cards turned. Queens. Strong. But not enough. The board ran clean. Kings held. The chips moved toward me in a heavy wave. And something subtle shifted. Not in sound. Not in posture. In atmosphere. The room recalibrated. The invisible math changed. Because now they knew. I wasn't just passing through. I wasn't a tourist. I wasn't luck-driven. I belonged at this table. And that realization carried consequences. From that point on, the hands grew sharper, faster, more violent. Aggression replaced caution. Every pot became a battlefield. Bluffs escalated. Traps tightened. Each player pushed deeper, trying to locate the breaking point in the others. The scarred knuckles men began to pressure relentlessly, attacking small weaknesses, forcing marginal decisions, testing patience. The trembling man oscillated between passivity and reckless overreach, his emotions swinging like a pendulum. The farmer remained unreadable, choosing his moments with predatory timing. And me? I became still. Not passive. Controlled. Because when everything becomes chaotic, stillness becomes power. Each hand blurred into the next. Wins and losses stacked like bricks, building invisible towers of pressure. The money grew abstract. Numbers lost meaning. What remained was tension, fatigue, psychological warfare. At one point, I caught my reflection in the polished edge of the table. My eyes looked older, sharper, like someone who had crossed a line and couldn't fully return. And that's when the realization struck me. Skill keeps you alive, but survival changes you. Every decision carved a microscopic notch into my sense of self. Every bluff left a residue. Every fold planted a seed of doubt. This game wasn't about extracting money. It was about extracting identity. Stripping players down to the core and seeing who remained. And as the hours dragged on, the pressure stopped feeling external. It moved inward. My heart rate slowed unnaturally. My breathing steadied into mechanical rhythm. Emotions flattened. This wasn't calm. It was adaptation. The human mind, learning how to exist under constant threat. Hand after hand, I walked the thin line between aggression and restraint. Too passive, and they'd consume me. Too aggressive, and I'd expose myself. The balance demanded perfection. And perfection is unsustainable. That's when the most dangerous realization emerged. I wasn't afraid anymore. And that terrified me. Because fear keeps you human. When fear disappears, something else takes its place. Something colder. Something sharper. Something capable of doing things you once swore you never would. The night outside thickened. Rain began tapping faintly against the distant windows, a muted reminder that a world still existed beyond these walls. But inside, time had collapsed. Minutes stretched into eternities. Hours dissolved into moments. There was only the table. Only the cards. Only the unspoken agreements binding us together. And beneath it all, an unyielding truth. None of us would leave unchanged. This room was a forge. And every hand struck the metal harder. Right here, let me pull you into that moment. If you were sitting at that table, your future balanced on intuition, your past stacked against your choices, would you have folded when fear stared back at you? Or would you have pushed everything forward, daring fate to blink first? Tell me in the comments, because your answer says more about you than any strategy ever could. And as the night pressed on, I began to sense something deeper stirring beneath the surface. This wasn't just another stop. This wasn't another anonymous table. This was preparation. A narrowing of possibilities. A funnel guiding me towards something inevitable. The stakes were rising. The rooms were getting smaller. The players sharper. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that the next table would demand more than skill. It would demand sacrifice. Because in this world, survival is only the beginning. And the real cost always arrives later. In the next room. At the next table. In the next city. Waiting. The air thickened as the night pressed forward. Not gradually. Abruptly. Like a storm front crashing into dry land. The hands grew sharper. Faster. More violent. Where once there had been calculation, now there was collision. Where there had been patience, now there was urgency. Money began to move in heavy stacks. Silently. As if ashamed to exist. Each pile slid across the felt with a dull, muted sound. Not the satisfying clink people imagine, but a soft thud, like something heavy being laid into a grave. No one celebrated wins. No one reacted to losses. Emotion had become a liability. Reaction, a weakness. Everything that mattered happened behind the eyes. The trembling man started to unravel. At first, it was subtle. A breath held too long. A blink that came too late. A micropause before each bet. Then the cards turned against him. King-queen into pocket aces. Top pair into a hidden set. Flush draw into a rivered full house. Each hand stripped away a layer of his confidence. Every loss carved deeper into his posture. His shoulders curved inward. His spine collapsed toward the table. Like gravity itself was turning against him. Across from me, scarred knuckles played with surgical precision. Never overreaching. Never retreating. Always positioning. He didn't chase. He didn't force. He waited. And then he struck. Each move felt deliberate. Part of a larger pattern. And slowly, with growing unease, I realized. He wasn't just mapping the table. He was mapping me. Every fold. Every hesitation. Every call. He was building a psychological blueprint. Not of my cards. Of my mind. And that knowledge weighed heavier than any pot. By midnight, the trembling man was bleeding chips. Not in dramatic losses. In steady, surgical extractions. A blind here. A missed draw there. A cautious fold after sinking too much into a pot. The kind of erosion that feels harmless until suddenly, it isn't. By 1 a.m., his stack looked fragile. Thin. Unstable. And that fragility changed how the table treated him. Predators sense weakness. Not consciously. Instinctively. The aggression toward him sharpened. Raises targeted his position. 3 bets isolated him. He became the gravitational center of conflict. And the more pressure he absorbed, the more he crumbled. His breathing grew erratic. His hands shook harder. His eyes darted between players, searching for mercy. None existed. This room didn't operate on mercy. It operated on consequence. Then came the hand that broke him. Ace-king. Premium. Power. Hope. The kind of hand that rescues drowning men. The flop fell. Ace. 9. 2. Top pair. Strong kicker. Finally. A moment of control. He bet aggressively. Not recklessly. Assertively. Like someone reclaiming ground. Scarred knuckles called. I folded. The farmer folded. The dealer burned and turned. 9. The board paired. Tension snapped through the room. The trembling man paused. Just for a fraction of a second. Then bet again. Harder. As if he could will reality to comply. Scarred knuckles called once more. The river came. 9. 4 of a kind. Scarred knuckles, tabled pocket nines. Silence detonated. Not loudly. Inwardly. The trembling man stared at the cards, then at the table, then at his hands, as if they had betrayed him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words emerged. Not a scream. Not a curse. Not a plea. Just breath. Uneven. Fragile. He pushed his chair back, stood, and walked toward the wall. Slowly. Mechanically. Like a marionette whose strings had been cut. And then he stopped. Because someone was already standing there. Waiting. A man I hadn't noticed before. Tall. Broad. Black jacket. Hands folded calmly in front of him. No expression. No threat. Just presence. And suddenly, the room understood what the trembling man was trying to do. He wasn't walking away. He was escaping. And escape was not permitted. The man in black took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Not hurried. Just enough to block the path. The trembling man froze. His shoulders trembled violently. For a moment, I thought he might collapse. Then Scarred Knuckles spoke. Softly. Sit down. 2 words. Not loud. Not cruel. Final. The trembling men hesitated. The man in black didn't move. Time stretched. Every heartbeat echoed. Then, slowly, he turned back. Returned to his seat. Sat. And stared at the felt. Broken. No one commented. No one reacted. The dealer reshuffled. Life continued. And that was the most terrifying part. Because it meant this wasn't extraordinary. This was routine. From that moment, the game transformed. The stakes didn't rise. They condensed. Every hand felt like a verdict. Every pot, a sentence. Nobody wanted to be next. Not the farmer. Not Scarred Knuckles. Not me. Fear returned not as panic, but as awareness. Sharp. Focused. Unavoidable. I adjusted. Tightened ranges. Reduced exposure. Increased precision. But even perfect play can't erase risk. It only postpones it. The hours crawled. 2 a.m. Then 3. The trembling man became a shadow. Calling small. Folding often. Existing on the edge of annihilation. Scarred Knuckles dominated the table. Not through aggression. Through inevitability. It felt like he already knew the outcome of each hand before the cards were dealt. And sometimes, I wondered if he did. Because his timing was flawless. His reads uncanny. His pressure perfectly calibrated. By 4 a.m., exhaustion clawed at my mind. Fatigue is the silent killer in games like this. It dulls instinct. Blurs judgment. Invites mistakes. I fought it. Counting breaths. Anchoring focus. Refusing to drift. But the room itself conspired against clarity. The cold. The dim lighting. The rhythmic hum. Everything worked to soften resistance. Then came the next shift. The farmer stood. Said nothing. And left. Not escorted. Not blocked. Simply gone. His chips remain. Collected by the dealer. Removed from the table. And with his departure, something tightened. The circle shrank. Now, 4 players. Then 3. When another man busted quietly and vanished behind the black door, it became just me. Scarred Knuckles. And the trembling man. The triangle of inevitability. The trembling man had almost nothing left. 1 orbit. Maybe 2. Scarred Knuckles sat on a mountain. I was somewhere in between. And in that imbalance, the next phase revealed itself. This was no longer about endurance. It was about selection. Who advanced? Who disappeared? And who paid the price for lasting too long? Scarred Knuckles leaned back. Studied me openly for the first time. His gaze wasn't hostile. It was analytical. curious, like a scientist examining a specimen that had survived longer than expected. I met his stare. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Because flinching gives answers. And answers are ammunition. The trembling man pushed his last chips, and moments later, Queen Jack. Hope. Scarred knuckles called instantly. Pocket tens. The board ran dry. The trembling man lost everything. He didn't move. Didn't stand. Didn't react. The man in black appeared again. Silent. Patient. Waiting. And this time, the trembling man didn't resist. He stood. Walked. And vanished through the door. No goodbye. No explanation. No closure. Just absence. The seat across from me remained empty. The dealer reshuffled. 2 players now. And the room felt suddenly enormous. Scarred Knuckles smiled faintly. The first real expression I'd seen from him all night. "This is where it begins," he said. Not threatening. Not inviting. Stating fact. The dealer dealt. Heads up. Every hand a duel. Every decision magnified. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about hierarchy. And in these underground worlds, hierarchy is everything. As the first cards of this final phase slid toward me, a cold certainty settled into my chest. Whatever happened next would follow me. Beyond this room. Beyond this city. Into the next. Because the game didn't end at the table. It traveled. It remembered. And it collected. And somewhere ahead, waiting in another city, another room, another shadowed table, the price would be higher. The choices darker. And the consequences permanent. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to hear from you. Would you have kept playing, knowing what waited beyond that door? Or would you have walked away while you still could? Tell me in the comments. And if you're ready to follow the story into its most dangerous chapter yet, make sure you're subscribed. Because the next moment changes everything. A tall man stepped forward. No suit. No tie. Just authority. He didn't announce himself. Didn't demand attention. He simply occupied space in a way that forced everyone else to adjust. "You're done," he said quietly. Not to me. To the trembling man. The trembling man nodded. Not in protest. Not in fear. In understanding. As if he'd known this moment would come the instant he sat down. He stood. Didn't look at the table. Didn't look at the chips. Didn't look at anyone. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell the faint metal of sweat and despair clinging to his clothes. Then he was gone. And for the first time, I truly understood. These games weren't about profit. They weren't about thrill. They weren't even about power. They were about sorting. Separating those who could carry consequence from those who couldn't. The tall man turned his attention to me. His eyes weren't cold. They were observant. Deep. Measured. "You've crossed 3 states," he said. "Not many survive that trajectory." His voice carried no praise. Only assessment. Like I was a storm he was tracking, not a man he was addressing. I said nothing. He leaned closer. Not threatening. Intimate. "This is your last table." The words landed with strange weight. Not final. Inevitable. The dealer began to shuffle. Slowly. Methodically. Every card bent slightly at the corners, worn thin by the countless decisions they had witnessed. Every shuffle sounded louder than it should have. The room fell into absolute silence. Even the air seemed to pause. My cards slid toward me. 7 of spades. 8 of spades. Connected. Dangerous. Alive. The kind of hand that whispers possibilities. Across from me, Scarred Knuckles didn't react. Didn't blink. Didn't shift. He merely glanced at his cards, then returned his gaze to me. The flop dropped. 5 of spades. 6 of hearts. King of diamonds. The table inhaled. An open-ended straight flush draw. A dream. A trap. My pulse hammered in my ears. Scarred knuckles raised. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Confidently. As if he were placing an offering. I called. Not because it was correct. Not because it was logical. But because something inside me refused to step back. The turn came. 9 of spades. Time froze. Straight. Flush. The nuts. The perfect hand. Every gambler dreams of this moment. The instant when probability collapses and destiny seems to smile. But something felt wrong. Too perfect. Too scripted. Too clean. Scarred knuckles didn't react. No frustration. No disbelief. No flicker of emotion. He stared at the board. Then at me. And shoved all in. Everything. Every chip. Every dollar. Every consequence. The mountain he had built across hours of surgical play slid forward in a single, silent wave. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't a bet. It was a question. Not of strategy. Of character. What do you do when the universe hands you everything? Do you take it? Or do you wonder why? My mind raced. His line made no sense. Not rationally. Not strategically. He had nothing to gain. He had everything to lose. And yet, his eyes held no fear. Only certainty. That certainty terrified me more than any bluff ever could. I studied him. His breathing was calm. His hands steady. His gaze unwavering. This wasn't desperation. This was intention. And suddenly, I understood the trap. This hand wasn't about cards. It was about exposure. If I called and won, I wouldn't just take his money. I would take his position, his status, his place in the hierarchy. And hierarchies don't forgive displacement. If I folded, I would survive. But I would forfeit. Not the pot. My future. Because at this table, retreat was its own form of loss. The room pressed inward. The tall man watched. Not impatient. Not curious. Judging. The dealer waited. Motionless. Scarred knuckles didn't move. Didn't blink. He already knew his answer. The only question was whether I knew mine. Images flickered through my mind. The backroom in New Orleans. The house with no address in Texas. The empty chair. The trembling man vanishing through a black door. This path hadn't been accidental. Every table had prepared me for this moment. Every city had sharpened the blade. And now, I stood at the edge. If I called, I would step into a world that no longer pretended to hide itself. If I folded, I would walk away with my life intact. But something inside me permanently diminished. My fingers touched the chips. Their weight felt unreal. Cold. Final. I looked up at Scarred Knuckles. For the first time, I saw something human in his eyes. Not fear. Recognition. He wasn't challenging me. He was welcoming me. Into a deeper circle. Into a darker game. I called. The room exhaled. Scarred Knuckles turned over his hand. 10 of hearts. Jack of hearts. A bluff. A masterpiece. He had nothing. Nothing but nerve. Nothing but conviction. Nothing but the certainty that I would fold. Because folding would have made sense. The dealer burned and turned the river. An irrelevant card. The hand was over. The chips moved. Toward me. A mountain collapsing into a continent. The weight of it was crushing. The tall men stepped closer. Studied the stacks. Then studied me. You chose correctly, he said. Not approval. Confirmation. Scarred Knuckles leaned back. A faint smile touched his lips. Not defeat. Relief. Like a man who had just passed something dangerous onto someone else. The dealer gathered the cards, reset the table. But the atmosphere had changed. This wasn't a game anymore. This was initiation. The tall man circled behind me. His voice dropped. From this point forward, he said, you don't walk away from tables like this. You get invited. A pause. And invitations always carry obligations. I nodded slowly. Because I finally understood. Winning wasn't victory. It was enrollment. Across 3 states, I hadn't been chased. I'd been evaluated, tested, shaped, prepared. And now, I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The tall man gestured toward the door. Get some rest, he said. You've earned it. The way he said earn chilled me. 2 men escorted me out. Not guards. Not escorts. Witnesses. The night air hit my lungs like ice. The stars above looked unfamiliar. Too distant. As I walked toward my car, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From awareness. Because I wasn't carrying money anymore. I was carrying expectation, responsibility, and a silent contract written in shadows. Somewhere ahead, another table waited. Another city. Another test. And the stakes would not be measured in dollars. They would be measured in choices, in loyalty, in silence. If this moment gripped you, if you felt that tension tighten around your chest, then stay with me. Because the next chapter isn't about winning. It's about pain. Tell me in the comments, would you have called? Or would you have folded and walked away? And if you want to follow this story as it descends deeper into the underground, like, subscribe, and meet me at the next table. For a moment, everything inside me screamed to call. Not because of greed. Not because of ego. But because of momentum. Because once you've been carried this far by the current, it feels unnatural to swim against it. If I called, I would win more money than I could ever spend. Enough to disappear. Enough to rewrite my name. Enough to buy silence, loyalty, protection. But I would also declare myself something else entirely. Not a gambler. Not a drifter. Not a visitor. But a permanent figure in a world that does not forgive hesitation. A world that does not forget faces. A world that never lets its own truly leave. I looked at scarred Knuckles. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Not tension. Containment. I looked at the dealer. His eyes never left the felt. As if he were refusing to witness the choice I was about to make. Then I looked at the tall man. And for the first time since I had entered that forgotten warehouse, I saw it. Not authority. Not threat. Expectation. Not that I would win. But that I would decide. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable. Sacred. Like the pause before a confession. Like the inhale before a plunge. Every table I had crossed rose inside me at once. The private room above the jazz club. The man who never inhaled again. The house with no address. The gravel road. The door painted black. The way Texas had weighed my hands, not my cards. Every lesson had been building toward this moment. And suddenly, I understood the final rule. The game was never about cards. It was about identity. Who you become when the cost of winning is transformation. Slowly, deliberately, I released my chips. They clicked softly as they touched the felt. A sound too small for a choice that large. I fold, I said. The words didn't shake. The room froze. Not in shock. In recognition. Scarred Knuckles exhaled. Not relief. Not triumph. Something closer to gratitude. Then, without ceremony, he turned over his hand. Pocket aces. 2 black monuments staring back at me. He had the higher straight draw. He had the stronger position. If I had called, the turn in river would have buried him. He would have lost everything. Instead, I gave it to him. Not out of mercy. Out of clarity. Because I finally understood the true stakes. It wasn't about who took the money. It was about who took the future. The tall man smiled. Not approval. Recognition. A quiet confirmation that I had passed the last test. Now you understand, he said. You weren't crossing states to win. You were crossing them to learn when to stop. The room exhaled. Not disappointment. Not celebration. Release. As if something long coiled inside its walls had finally been allowed to rest. The dealer gathered the cards. The game dissolved. Not in noise. In quiet acceptance. Men stood. Chairs slid back. Coats were lifted from the backs of seats. No one spoke. Because nothing needed to be said. Scarred knuckles met my eyes. For a moment, I saw what he might have become if he had folded once, long ago. Then he nodded. Just once. And turned away. Outside, the river town slept. Its crooked streets curved through shadows and silence. No sirens. No witnesses. No memory. I walked alone toward my car. For the first time since New Orleans, the night did not feel hostile. It felt neutral. Observant. As if waiting to see what kind of man I would become without a table in front of me. Inside the car, I sat without starting the engine. My hands rested on the wheel. Still. Steady. The money lay heavy beside me. But it no longer felt like power. It felt like residue. Something left behind from a version of myself that had almost existed. I thought about how close I had come. One decision. One breath. One instinct. And my entire trajectory would have locked into place. I would have been summoned again. And again. And again. Until the tables became my only geography. Until the rooms replaced cities. Until I stopped asking where I was going. Only who was waiting. The realization settled slowly. The true danger had never been losing. It had been belonging. Belonging to a world where every relationship is transactional. Where loyalty is enforced. Where absence is noticed. Where silence is purchased. Where exit is theoretical. The tall man's words echoed in my mind. You were crossing them to learn when to stop. Not when to quit. Not when to fail. When to stop. Because stopping requires something far rarer than courage. It requires restraint. The discipline to walk away, not when you are weak, but when you are powerful. That is the moment most people fail. I started the engine. The sound shattered the stillness. As I drove, the river vanished behind me. Then the warehouses. Then the shadows. The road stretched forward, empty and pale under the rising moon. But I knew better. Now, even empty roads are never truly empty. They are lined with choices. Each mile carrying its own invitation. Some obvious. Some disguised. Some impossible to recognize until you are already too far in. I drove until the sky began to lighten. Until the horizon softened from black to deep blue. Until the weight in my chest loosened enough to breathe. Somewhere ahead, another city waited. Another life. Another version of myself. But this time, would choose what I carried forward. Not the money. Not the reputation. Not the shadow of the tables. Only the lesson. That the game never wanted my skill. It wanted my allegiance. And for the first time, I had refused. If this moment made you pause, if it forced you to examine your own thresholds, then this story is doing its work. Because somewhere in your life, there is a table waiting. A moment where you will be offered more than you ever imagined. And the real question will not be, can you win? It will be, can you walk away? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have called and claimed the power? Or folded and protected your freedom? Because your answer reveals far more than your strategy. And in the next episode, you'll see what happens when the world refuses to accept your decision. Because some games don't end when you leave the table. They follow you. Across borders. Across years. Across lives. I left before sunrise. No escort. No warning. No congratulations. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, as if it were placed there carefully, like a final piece on a board that no longer needs rearranging. The building behind me faded into the early gray light, losing its edges, losing its weight, until it became just another forgotten shape against a horizon that had seen too many men arrive with hope and leave with something far heavier. The highway stretched endlessly before me, two thin lines disappearing into a pale dawn. And for the first time since Texas, the money beside me felt lighter. Not because there was less of it, but because it no longer owned my attention. Because I finally understood something I should have learned much earlier in life. The most dangerous game isn't poker. It's knowing when to walk away. And living with the version of yourself that stayed long enough to learn that. For miles, I drove without turning on the radio. Without seeking distraction. Without chasing silence. The road hummed beneath the tires like a low confession. A steady reminder that movement itself is a choice. That staying still, in a world that constantly invites motion, is often the bravest decision of all. The sky slowly opened. Deep blue softened into steel. Steel into pale gold. Morning unfolded without urgency, unconcerned with the invisible wars that had played out overnight in windowless rooms. Somewhere behind me, men were already reshuffling cards, recounting stacks, resetting tables, preparing to test the next soul who believed skill alone could protect them. I wondered how many of them would understand what the game truly demanded. How many would recognize the moment when winning stopped being success and started becoming a sentence. Because there is a moment like that in every life. It doesn't always come wrapped in money. Sometimes it arrives as power. Sometimes as influence. Sometimes as love. Sometimes as recognition. But it always comes as an invitation. A quiet offer to step further into something that cannot be undone. And the world rarely teaches us how to say no. It teaches us how to want. It teaches us how to chase. It teaches us how to conquer. But it never teaches us how to stop. The road curved gently, guiding me through sleeping towns that still smelled of yesterday's rain and old ambition. Gas stations glowed faintly. Diners prepared for early customers. Neon flickered back to life like tired stars. Normal life continued, unaware of the strange pilgrimage I had just completed. And in that normality, I felt something close to peace. Not relief. Not joy. Peace. The absence of pressure. The absence of expectation. The rare luxury of not being watched. Yet even as the tension drained from my body, I knew something fundamental had changed. You do not walk through rooms like that and remain untouched. You do not sit at tables that sort human beings and leave unchanged. You do not witness how quietly destiny can be negotiated and returned to innocence. The game had altered the way I saw the world. Not darker, clearer. Every interaction now seemed layered. Every gesture carried possible intention. Every kindness hinted at transaction. Not in a paranoid way. In a sober one. I had seen how easily meaning could be assigned to silence. How quickly behavior could become currency. How effortlessly power could hide behind politeness. And perhaps most dangerously of all, I had seen how seductive control could feel. Not over others. Over uncertainty. The tables promised certainty. Rules. Boundaries. Structures. They offered a world where chaos could be reduced to probabilities and odds. Where fear could be measured. Where fate could be teased into revealing patterns. And for a moment, I had believed that mastery of those patterns might lead to freedom. But true freedom, I realize, lives somewhere else entirely. It lives in the ability to walk away from certainty, to embrace ambiguity, to choose an open road over a closed room, to accept not knowing what comes next. As the miles accumulated, memories surfaced in fragments. The man in New Orleans who never inhaled again. The house with no address. The gravel crunching beneath tires. The black door. The heavy table. The scarred knuckles. The trembling hands. The tall man's measured voice. Each memory carried weight, but none carried regret. Because every step, every wrist, every silence had led me here. To this moment of clarity. Some games don't follow you to take your money. They follow to see what kind of person you become when you have it. They want to observe how you carry power, how you distribute it, how you justify it, how you protect it, how you let it reshape your values. They don't test skill. They test character. And character, unlike money, cannot be replaced once lost. By late morning, the sun burned high and clean. The highway shimmered ahead. Heat rose in thin waves, distorting the horizon like a mirage. I pulled into a small roadside turnout and stepped out of the car. The air smelled of dust and grass and distant rain. A wide, open sky stretched above me, vast and indifferent. For a long moment, I simply stood there, letting the wind move across my face, grounding myself in the simple fact of being alive. Not evaluated. Not judged. Not measured. Just present. I thought about how easily life could become a sequence of tests if you allowed it. How quickly you could start defining yourself by what you survived instead of what you chose. And I made a quiet promise. That I would not let the game define me. That I would not carry its rules into every room. That I would remember how to be ordinary. How to be invisible. How to be free. Because survival is not victory. Awareness is. The world thrives on momentum, on escalation, on constant growth. But there is a deeper intelligence in restraint. In knowing that expansion without purpose becomes destruction. In understanding that accumulation without intention becomes burden. In realizing that ambition without reflection becomes obsession. And obsession always demands payment. The money sat beside me, heavy but mute. It would shape certain choices, open certain doors, close others, but it would not decide who I was. That decision belonged to me. Always. Even when it felt otherwise. As I drove on, I imagined the people watching this story unfold. People in cities I would never visit. Lives I would never touch. Choices I would never witness. And yet, in this moment, connected by the simple act of listening. Because stories do that. They collapse distance. They compress time. They allow us to live 1,000 lives without abandoning our own. And maybe, somewhere in this journey, there is a reflection meant for you. Not about poker. Not about money. Not about underground rooms. But about the quiet crossroads you stand at each day. The moments when you feel the pull to go further, deeper, faster. The moments when stopping feels like failure. When restraint feels like weakness. When walking away feels like surrender. But what if those moments are exactly the opposite? What if walking away is not losing, but choosing a different form of victory? What if the most powerful move you can make is the one that leaves no trace? What if the greatest success is not dominance, but balance? Because there will always be another table, another deal, another offer, another temptation, another invitation, another test. The game never ends. It only changes form. Sometimes it looks like opportunity. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it looks like fear. But the question remains the same. Who will you become when you are allowed to win? The road carried me forward, mile after mile, until the past loosened its grip and the future began to breathe. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to smile. Not because I had won, but because I had chosen. Because choice, in the end, is the only real currency. Everything else is just a means of exchange. Now, I want to hear from you. Be honest. Be instinctive. Be real. Would you have called that final hand yes or no? And what city are you watching from right now? Write your answers below. I read every comment. Your perspective adds another layer to this story, another dimension to this journey. If this episode stayed with you, a like. It helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. And subscribe to continue this journey. Because in episode 6, I wouldn't be tested on money. I would be tested on loyalty. And that is a game no one truly wins.